Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Conspire a Theory. I have with me from the Curious Realm, Chris Jordan. Chris Jordan, how are you doing?
Doing great. And you, Chris?
I'm doing fantastic. I've run into you at a lot of events recently, especially the local ones.
Yeah.
You seem to be handling a lot of audio and video and the like at a lot of these shows, which is good. Because if there's one thing that I notice a lot of, no matter how many spacefaring, Bigfoot hunting, ghost stomping people out there, one of the hardest things for them to do is to plug a microphone into
to do. And I got to say, it is a passion of mine. It's what I do for a living. I basically travel the country in social media groups where you see like poorly describe what you do for a living. I normally travel the country playing with other people's expensive toys. Because that's what I do. I go to conferences and hook up breakout rooms for meetings where people are doing trainings and stuff like that. So setting up microphones, running projectors, setting up computers to be a show computer, and hide all the dirty secrets of PowerPoint and everything. It's what I do, and I love it. And I love being able to, I guess, kind of come to local events whenever I can and help out, bring a new level of production to it. It's great.
Yeah, I really had an interest in your show because your show is really good. I listen to it mostly on audio. It's like 2 sometimes hour sessions, sometimes 30-minute sessions of dual interviews. If one doesn't catch me, the next one will. It's a decent variety, and I've noticed they're not always on the same topic as well, which is very good production management on your part. I had noticed recently on your website that you're offering like a couple of services out there. So if people who are listening might want to, have some things that you might be able to offer them. If you could probably just highlight a little bit about that.
Sure.
Pitch your stuff before we continue.
One of my latest endeavors is Curious Research. This show, even before it became Curious Realm, was all about the conversation, Chris. It was all about having hard conversations about topics that many people find uncomfortable. And because of that, sadly, we end up never having a conversation about it. And a prime example is kind of like the whole UFO UAP situation. The idea that it took us relabeling UFO to UAP for scientists to go, yeah, all right, maybe we'll take a look at it. Like until you put it as phenomena. Well, the funny thing is in science, you've got to get rid of the phenomena. You've got to eliminate it. If I did in chemistry in high school, if I turned in an equation of a chemical reaction and 5% of that equation was missing, what happened to it, Chris? Did it go to off gas? Did it become solid? You've got to account for the 5% missing part of the equation. Did it go to exothermic reaction? What happened to it? Now you've got to go find that 5%. So by relabeling it phenomena, we landed it in the backyard of science, like swoosh, straight through the net. So it requires them, it is now incumbent upon them to look into the topic. Because, hey, if you're studying weather, there's a phenomenon in your sky. How do you get rid of that? How do you eliminate that from your data set now? And that's kind of the ongoing mission of Curious Research, is to bring these worlds of paranormal and paranormal research that weekend warriors are out there doing, things like that, and get them ready to shake hands with science. Because it's all coming together now, and it's really fascinating to see things like quantum entanglement winning the Nobel Peace Prize. That is one of the big ones that I go off on my show all the time, because that's quite literally the roots of remote viewing, is the idea that we are connected in a different way, and that we can manipulate things from a distance. We can peer into the distance. It's pretty fascinating stuff, So Curious Research is my endeavor to prepare researchers who are out there in the field doing Sasquatch hunting, doing paranormal investigation, doing UFO, UAP investigation, to begin to actually chronicle their data and archive their data, because a picture is only worth 1,000 words to somebody who was at the event. You know, the only reason why you know what a picture of a wedding is because you've been to a wedding. Aside from that, it's a picture. I can see there's an event and there's some happy people, but because I have no frame of reference of having been to a wedding, what's the 1,000 words behind that picture? So now somebody has to tell me the story. Well, this is John, this is Jenny. They met years ago. You know, now you're getting the 1,000 words behind that picture. And a lot of people in communities get very upset about red circles on pictures, Chris. Very upset. And I almost started a funding campaign for National Red Circle Day. Like, more red circles, please. Because here's the thing. If we don't see the red circles, and this also goes for the red circle folk, because we need more red circles. Without that, we cannot eliminate some of the things in those red circles, which that's part of science, is to eliminate the known quantitative and leave only the anomaly now. So if you bring us something in a red circle and we happen to explain it, please don't be upset. Doesn't negate your experience, but it does increase the data field. You know, it increases the data field of known quantitative within the experiment. And once you have that, you've begun to really narrow down things to just the anomaly left. So while a lot of people are like, stop with the red circles already, I'm like, please bring us more red circles. I know it's more data that we need to cull through, but we've got to be willing to look at that data. We've got to be willing to, even if it is known quantitative, even if it is pareidolia, you know, we've got to be willing to court it, and we've got to be willing to look at it. And at the same token, the people presenting it have to be ready for it to be a known quantitative and for that to be okay, and to have still contributed to the scientific process of this research by doing so.
Yeah. If I could step in, that's
Please.
interesting. I like that you have these little handy dandy notebooks that you're selling. Also, I love those. I love the idea of giving people, a little things that those who are active researchers, not just experiencers, but active researchers, to be able to properly chronicle their data. Because so many times, a lot of people, they gather all these hours and hours of data, and then it's like, well, what are you going to do with it? And then they say, well, we're just gathering data, and then. Honestly, if a lot of them were honest, what they say is what we're going to do to it is, submit it to the Travel Channel so that we can get a TV show.
Yeah.
Which I think most like a large percentage of these groups are, is they're just, television pitch people.
Just pitch artists.
Yeah. And I've got nothing. I can't bash those people because they outnumber me. But the thing is that
you're honest, if nothing, Chris.
Yeah. The thing is that when it comes to gathering data and stuff like this, I feel that archiving everything is really important.
It's massive.
Whether it's the like a lot of people are talking about Corey Good stuff and the UFO lore. It has so much lore out there. And if you're an old person or someone who's very well researched, you'll notice that a lot of these experiencer stories, once they hit guru-dom, they start to regurgitate a lot of the tried and true stuff that we've seen in the past. And if you know anything about like the Nazi UFOs and Valiant Thor and all of these, a lot of these tried and true characters and stuff, and oftentimes the criticism is often, well, they're just bringing up old stuff to try to glom onto that to give themselves more credibility by claiming a crossover of some sort. But I still feel that it's important to have that, that information there, whether or not these people are later proven hoaxers or not, because it serves, to me, archival merit.
That's just it. And when it comes to science, archive is important. That is the data set. That's what you're pulling and culling from. And it's massively important to be able to communicate that to somebody in a scientific way, being able to have it properly cataloged, being able to, I just did a huge archiving project for MUFON with the archive of Hayden Hughes with the International UFO Bureau and all of his files and data and video and things like that. And yeah, the thing is what we tend to forget. I love my show. I've heard your show. I love shows, but the internet was not made for us. The internet was made for research. When the internet originally came around, the intranet, it was quite literally labs and facilities. It was Lawrence Livermore connected with MIT and things like that so that they could share data in real time and further research in a faster capacity. That is not what it's used for anymore. There may be repositories of information and things like that. There may be some swapping going on, but 90% of traffic on the internet is no longer research. It's no longer people sharing data in that kind of way to further a scientific cause. I would venture to say that even videos that we share online and things like that are not typically to further a scientific cause. Even the ones that I share in my Curious Realm group, things like that, they are there to start a conversation, to prod people into motion and into activation mentally. But they aren't there for the cause of research necessarily. Like, let's share opinions about it. Let's break it down. But is that hard laboratory research? Is that putting it through filters and checking things in that kind of way? And that's what the internet's supposed to be used for. So to digitize these things, to know that there are people out there, researchers out there. And the way I explained it to literally the person who had this archive, when they were like, I don't know how these things just disappear. And I was like, I don't know. I'm a kid of the 80s. I had some really cool He-Men at one point. Where'd they go? I grew up. I moved away. There's a box of toys. See ya, box of toys. People pass away, and though it's their all-encompassing passion, Chris, it's not the passion of their spouse. And their spouse now has no idea what to do with it. No idea, And I've jokingly said for years, just with all of my equipment that I have here in my studio and stuff like it, it's my job to burden my wife upon my death to figure out what all these things do and what their value is. Like, she will literally have to fly in one of my friends to be like, I need you to come in and just go through the studio and tell me what this man has. I have no idea what any of this stuff does. So, and it's very much the same way. It's like, how does a Mustang end up in a barn for 50 years and never get driven? So research is very much the same way. And unfortunately, even research on vacuum power and vacuum energy does not happen in a vacuum. It cannot happen by yourself. You have to have other researchers. So yeah, the idea of digitizing these things, putting them out there, being able to make them accessible is vital to this research continuing, I believe.
Yeah, I do feel that, the knowing what our history is very important. I remember one of your other archive projects that I heard you talk about in the past was the Applewhite archive of the media outlets covering the Heaven's Gate cult. And I remember growing up as a kid in the 90s, witnessing that firsthand, and that had a huge influence. I mean, there were episodes of, I think, the X-Files that dealt with that, and as well as even I remember an episode of Cowboy Bebop had a Heaven's Gate episode.
There was a made-for-TV movie in the 80s about those two. They like T and Doe had been at that since the mid 70s, early 70s. You know, and yeah, they had such a national splash that, like, I think it was ABC did like a made-for-TV movie in 1982. The Other Two, it was called The Other Two. That was about two people that came and delivered the message of T and Doe. And it was like, what is this? Like, oh my God, I can't believe that there was an actual made-for-TV movie, like, smooth a decade plus before the incident. But even that, you know, after archiving that, which that happened shortly after I spent a year as a Roman Catholic seminarian, many years after that as a youth minister and teaching. And I always found it odd because, as opposed to a lot of other cults, quote cults, I'm going to throw air quotes up there for listeners who aren't watching on video. As opposed to a lot of others, nothing was forced upon people. They were able to go back home to family if they want, able to leave and come back. They were not like, hey, yeah, sell your house and give us all the money. Like, they weren't even like that. They were like, if you want to sell your house, fine, you know, but we recommend that you give the money to your family. Like, you'll have no need for money here. They built websites for people, is how they actively made their income. There were tons. There were like 2 or 3 major greeting card companies who had their websites built by Heaven's Gate. And I forget what their production company was that did all that. But it was fascinating. And amongst all that, I chronicled 40 hours of broadcast video, 40 hours of news coverage about the event. And the two things that I found fascinating, Chris, that was 1997. That happened. We are just rapidly coming up on the 30th anniversary of that event. The two things, and 97 was like the infancy of the internet as we know it. HTML was just becoming a thing a year or two prior to that. This was about 4 years past the point of dial into a mobile bulletin board system to chat with people or to file share or to look at something. It was the beginning of WW protocols, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, I remember my ICQ number and all that stuff.
Yeah. For the longest time, I did still have like the little typed out piece of paper with the one bulletin board system that I used to go to Houston all the time. I don't know what happened to it, but it made me sad when I lost it. But quite literally, it was one of those, like, after chronicling 40 hours of video of news footage about this event, the two things that were constantly echoed were they used the internet to pull in people who were looking for a place to belong, looking for belief, and took, you used these people who are lonely and looking for belonging, looking for a place to belong. And then the other one was these people who spend all their time on the internet and all of their friends are digital and chat rooms and things like that. They have a problem disseminating reality from fantasy on the internet and fact from fiction. We are almost 30 years down the line of internet use, Chris. Those are still the two major things going on in our society right now. You know, I mean, that's one of the things that I say about AI regularly on my show is you can take it as a point of relief, or you can take it as a point of utter destruction at some point. But AI, as we know it, ChatGPT, will be as smart as the average person reading the internet because it's pulling its data off of the internet. So that means it's pulling treasure and trash at the same time, which is how kids end up getting caught cheating on papers, having ChatGPT write it for him, and stuff like that. I remember Dr. Robert Duncan, when he was alive, came on my show to talk about AI, because he wrote some of the first AI algorithms back in the 80s. And I had AI write a bio for him. It was like, fact checked. How much of that is true? He's like, man, I wish I started that company they said I started. That'd be cool. Like, it was hilarious, though, because a good 30% of the bio that it wrote about him was utterly drawn from something else. So yeah, even AI has problem filtering fact from fantasy, you know. And it's interesting to see that we're up against that, and our brains do the same thing, man. Like that's one of the reasons I made the observation and encounter log, was because if you're out in the middle of the woods, you have a Sasquatch encounter, you have a 45-minute walk back to camp, your brain is processing that data at that point. It's no longer in a raw form. By the time you get back to camp, by the time you start sharing that story, you've already started passing it through filters of belief. You have already started passing it through filters of reality, through filters of experience, through filters of stories you've heard of the localized area, things like that. So if you can write that down immediately, raw as possible, you know, any good police officer will tell you past 48 hours, a witness statement is all but useless. You know, there's a whole show on TV about murder cases called First 48, where if things go past the first 48 hours, good luck catching that guy. By that point, people's descriptions of somebody are deprecated. By that point, people's memories are deprecated, all kinds of things. You know, I mean, there's a reason why an eyewitness is not really that great of a thing in a court of law. You know, many courts do not accept them because, well, you may be witnessing the wrong thing. You know, it's pretty fascinating, and our brains want to do that. Our brains want pattern, Chris. They thrive for it. It's what's kept us alive for millennia, is recognizing the pattern, whether it's recognizing the pattern of a predator's footsteps in the dark, you know, what have you. Pattern recognition is one of the things that has helped us thrive as a species throughout millennia. So to think that our brains would get rid of it in a digital age is just foolhardy, I believe.
Yeah, if I could take a minute to talk about AI, because, you know, I'm like a visual artist myself, a digital artist myself, and
great art.
I see the argument that I hear about AI now. Like, I understand it, but also I'm at the same time fascinated by AI. I love seeing what it can do.
Yeah.
And it certainly has a cool factor about it, and it's only getting better.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
What gets me is this sort of, I guess, everybody's got their torch and pitchforks ready to go. And I think it's a bit prematurely. Well, we're seeing, like, somehow, because I guess AI is out in front of us, or at least we believe so.
Yeah.
We're seeing it going through the growing pains. And a lot of people, when they analyze, you know, like when they discuss AI, usually they're discussing it, you know, how good it is at that moment, that they don't realize that, yeah, it's going to get better and all this stuff. And I can understand, you know, why people are threatened by this. I remember during the early 2000s when digital art was coming to prominence, and all the traditional artists were like, well, if you're not using real media, you're not a real artist.
Exactly.
And
it's like, we've been through this before. I was a deck-to-deck video editor. All right. That is how I learned. I learned to shoot video for editing, so that you didn't stretch. So you stretch the tape as little as possible. You edit in the camera as much as you can. That's how I was taught to shoot. It's how I was taught to edit. Then nonlinear video editing came in and changed the game. The game. This was before Adobe joined with Boris Effects, and before when Premiere was its own thing before Adobe bought it, things like that. And yeah, this has always been an argument. The fact of, well, if you're not using a brush, are you an artist?
Mhm.
And that's the thing, and that I bring it up regularly. Like, you will never replace a good graphic designer. You will not. You will not. The skills that person has are on another level that you just cannot train an AI to do. And I will say the same thing about audio editing, video editing. There's been stuff like Descript around for years where you throw in your audio, you give it the transcript, and you can go in and edit the transcript and it'll snip things out. Doesn't sound that smooth. Things are a little jerky sometimes. And if you started doing that same Descript for video, you'd start seeing jump cuts everywhere where people are max headrooming around, So yeah, there are things like that require subtlety, that require an artist touch. There may be some very good AI algorithms out there that do noise reduction and things like that far better than the human ear for certain. But when it comes to editing, that kind of stuff, I will go to a human and default to a human all day long. I use Midjourney. I'm well versed in my world of Photoshop. I have been doing photo recovery, things like that for years, designing my own album covers, stuff like that. However, I will gladly pay for Midjourney because I own the rights to the images I generate. I do not generate it in the style of anybody. Nobody's style is to be used in my Midjourney uses. So it's not like, hey, yeah, generate a Disney style character. Like, it's not what I want. What I want is like flat elements that I can build logos out of, where it's like, oh, so you want a T-Rex in your logo. Here's 8 different versions of a T-Rex where I don't have to go then pay for clip art and keep up with rights. And then somehow their clip art is also used in somebody else's because, well, they went to the same clip art page and just purchased the royalty for it, things like that. So when you're talking that realm, now you're using AI as a tool. It's no different than a brush in your kit, because now you're going to take those elements and you're still going to put them into Photoshop and you're still going to use your old school skills to meld them together and turn them into a final product, but it definitely does expedite the process of, let me generate 5 different types of dinosaur for them to choose from, as far as things like that when it comes to digital generation. So I can see the arguments both ways.
I
appreciate the artists that are muy against it because, a lot of people are using it to generate specific styles and to train an AI in somebody's style. And I don't want that.
Yeah. From what I've seen, I see echoes of that same conversation. And of course, I remember that conversation ending that, it reached a point that, people just didn't care to argue it anymore. I mean,
because
traditional
artists, look at my crap, man. It's just as good as anybody that was doing, Isaac Asimov covers in 1965 by hand. You can
the traditional stuff. It still has that level of novelty and stuff like this. At craft shows and stuff like this, people are still gonna, they're still gonna buy a hand painted something or other.
That's right. And
rather
I can have an AI generated calendar, and guaranteed somebody next to me with a hand drawn calendar of characters they've created, things like that, will probably sell just as many, if not more, because of the appreciation of the hand done art. As somebody who goes to a lot of pop culture conventions, a lot of Comic-Cons just for fun, Artist Alley is one of the best places around. And that ain't AI generated. That's people sitting there drawing stuff. Like my room is filled with,
as far as we know,
comic pieces and hand painted comic book art, things like that. Because yeah, there is something physical to it. No different than whenever I'm creating music. I may use some programs and things like that here and there, but I am still very analog in the way that I record. I still record as though I'm using an analog 4-track. I don't enjoy the digital recording space as far as digital audio workstations, things like that. It is something I have been shoehorned into using, not an environment that I love. You know?
I think a lot of the general people though tend to have like I don't know if they understand the application so much of AI as well. From what I've seen, AI does at the time it does borrow from a real world data set. So, but also I believe is that it depends on who's offering the AI now. We're starting to see hiccups where AI is becoming restricted in that there's some stuff that it simply won't do. Yep. Because whoever's selling you the AI license for you to use has put up prerequisites that it can't do this or that.
That's right. You typically cannot generate nude images. You typically cannot generate images of violence. You typically cannot generate images of any kind of racial slur, things like that. Many images it will not generate. Like I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that Midjourney will not generate an image of Muhammad, for instance.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it kind of stinks though, is that, the preservation of traditional art is through the realms of degeneracy and political discord and edgy boy humor, and stuff like that, which is sort of like what it always was. And I remember in the 90s. Before, if you wanted like alternative comic books, you had to go to the head shop, and
that's right.
There they would have, not just alternative, non-mainstream comics, but also LGBT comic books that dealt in that. And of course now Marvel Comics and DC, they've sort of become the LGBT comics now.
It's accepted in the comic book world now. And I remember the first intergender kiss in that kind of way, things like that, when it occurred. And yeah, it's one of those art, definitely. And I mean, even to go into the whole issue that happened at the Olympics this last year and the way that art went around. The one thing that I kept saying was hate it, love it, doesn't really matter. I think France once again showed us what art is, and art starts the conversation, period. End of story. You can hate it, you can love it, but as soon as you start having a conversation about it, the art succeeded.
I remember the only thing I remember from the Olympics was the ray gun breakdancing. That's all I remember.
Yeah, well, even that though, that's a prime example. That is somebody's artistic expression form, part of it. Whether you liked it, whether you hated it, doesn't really matter. It opened the conversation, which now makes it art. Like you validated it as art by having the conversation. That's the point of art. The point of art is to represent something and to move people, And I used to write a lot of really weird esoteric music before I did my therapy music and before I did my beat-oriented music. It was all very representative, avant-garde, more playing with space and sonics than melody and harmony. Sometimes it was very eclectic in the way that it played, let's just say. And my dad would tune in every once in a while. I was on a show in Houston every fourth Sunday for local composers night. And I'd bring things in and people would call in and ask about the music and the recording. And every once in a while, my dad would listen. He'd be like, hey, why can't you just write some music like with a beat people can dance to? Like, well, I guess if I made music like that for people like you all the time, maybe I wouldn't be making so much music. I write this because it moves me. And as an artist, I'm appeased by the fact that it obviously moved you to comment. Like, that to me validates that whether you liked it or not doesn't matter. The fact that you were moved to make a comment resonates with me as an artist. It means that it moved you in some way, whether it was to love or disgust, it moved you. And I want to know about it, because that's, and that's just it. Like, we've got to be ready to have the conversation, just to take it right back to the points of research. You know, we've got to be willing to have the conversation. We've got to be willing to have the conversation about AI, because it is not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. They aren't going to pull the plug on it. I work a lot of the shows. I worked NVIDIA-Con for a long time. They've been talking about this for years, man. I was looking at AI algorithms on my stage and things like that almost a decade ago, before they got released in this kind of way, into the wild, where they were beta testing programs and things like that. So it's great to see it. And yes, we, much like anything, have to use it responsibly. Once again, to know that it depends a lot on the model, you know, because AI doesn't just sit there and learn. It's not how it works. It doesn't just sit and learn. It doesn't move. It's like a slinky. All right. There's a great way to put it. It's like a slinky. There is tons of potential in that slinky as far as physics goes. It does nothing until you slink it, until you actively like prompt the slinky, move, go. It just sits there. So ChatGPT is the same way. It's not just sitting there ingesting things and learning while people are not prompting it. You know, that's not what it's doing. So it only learns when prompted. And even then, it may not learn that well. You may have to correct it. You may have to ask it to correct itself and to correct its corrections. You know, I use it for writing little snippets of script that do things automatically, things like that. It's fantastic for those kind of things. But it will never replace even the script that I had it write. I turned over to a coding friend of mine and was like, hey, man, I give you a couple $100. Can you like clean the script up for me? I've gotten as far as I can get with ChatGPT. I need a human.
Yeah.
But it got me off on a great start where I didn't have to like ask my friend to build a script from scratch for me, you know, where it was like, hey, pretty this up, you know, and that's just it. When used in that way, it's fantastic. And we have to remember that the onus is on us. I don't think we've got any kind of genie that's going to pop out of a bottle. I don't think we're going to end up with Skynet next week, you know. Anything like that, nothing like that. So yeah, I think there are a lot of people, like any situation, man. Geez, we've got 150 people dead from a hurricane, and people saying that somebody planned it because they own the lithium rights in North Carolina. It's like, what the heck, man? What is even the vested interest in that? I don't get it. So yeah. It's funny where our social media minds take us. It's funny where we allow the rabbit holes to take us if we don't pump brakes. You know, it's something I bring up regularly. We as hosts have a pretty big onus upon us to make sure that we are as educated as possible on a topic.
Yeah, at least to hear some like alternative views, because I have heard from some, like the AI not the proponents, but the anti-ponents.
Oh yeah.
They do bring up some good points that some of these AI data sets were unethically acquired, and that's usually the people's, you know, quandary with it, is that it draws in these like prominent artist style, and they did not submit their you know, copyrighted stuff to it. Sure. To be used as a data set. And I mean, I don't think that's going to kill the momentum, but it is a good point that I feel is brought up.
I can see that.
And other issues, you know, and like we were talking about with like the political discourse where Mid-Journey won't do this or that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I am sort of glad to see that, you know, I spent so many years trying to learn how to draw good hands, and I see that, you know, even AI was drawn it. just drawing it just as long as I have, isn't that much better, but at least, at least now I finally get to a point that I'm confident that I can draw hands well. But the issue is that, it's still learning, it's still growing.
That's right.
And I don't know.
The example I give regularly is Tay, one of the first AIs released into the wild by Microsoft, and this is a prime example of an AI is as smart as what you give it and as smart as the data pool. Tay was a language learning AI that Microsoft released into the wild on Twitter back in 2015, something like that. Don't quote me on that. It may have been between 13 and 16. Anyway, Tay had the intelligence of about a 9-year-old girl, grammar-wise, thought-wise, things like that, was put onto Twitter to learn and to interact with people. Tay was taken offline in less than 48 hours because by the end of it, Tay had the intelligence of about an early 20-year-old and was a raving racist from all the trash that it was fed on Twitter. So
yeah. I believe that.
Example of, but it's no different than us as humans. Like, as a former youth minister, that was one of the things I used to teach kids all the time: is you are as good as the friends you hang around, man. You're as good as what goes in. If you've got trash going in, it's going to be real hard to have real good stuff coming out. And it's the same way with humanity, so we have to be willing to take a throttle back, filter information ourselves. I utilize an AI all the time that I love called SciSummary, which is a host. If there is a topic that I'm unfamiliar with, things like that, SciSummary does not pull from the internet. It doesn't, unless you give it the internet. And at that point, it's like it asks you for your sources. So you either upload a PDF or you give it like the PDF online. So it's like, here's a link to a scholarly article on liver cancer. Let's say I'm a cancer researcher and I'm trying to cull together the last year of liver enzyme papers that have been released. So I can take all of those PDFs, put them in there, and ask it to give me a 5,000 word summary with 10 bullet points. And it only draws at that point from the PDFs I give it, or the links to PDFs I give it. So it's not just looking through WebMD for things. It's not just searching Google. It's not just search. It's only searching the data that you give it. So even as a show host, if somebody sends me a PDF of their book, I can send it in there and say, give me a 500-word summary with 5 bullet points. And I still read the first 150 pages of the book like I always do, but it gives me a great summarization of what the book's about, things like that. So as far as getting cliff notes, that kind of thing, fantastic tool. And once again, is only drawing from the data that you give it, doesn't draw from anywhere else. I've been so impressed with it. Like, I bought the lifetime plan and use it regularly. It's really cool, where it's like, hey, here's a 150 page patent application. Let me throw it in there and see what the principles are about. That kind of stuff. It's really cool. So you can utilize AI for stuff like that. That's really great and a fantastic leverage in the world of research. And at the same token, trying to get it to write something in somebody's style is very hard, and do you want it to do that? Even the idea of James Earl Jones, one of the first things I remember covering for AI for my show years ago was the Adobe software that they never actively released. It was only released in beta to a very select number of testers, and it made major news. And when it did, I was like, this is going to change Hollywood contracts. And lo and behold, it did. It was software that was released where, as long as they had 20 minutes of you talking, they could type anything into the software and have your voice say it. anything. And when you start looking at Hollywood and the fact of every one of those actors has been in to do ADR, you know, they've all been in to do audio to digital replacement, to voice over their own stuff because it was too windy when they shot the scene, things like that. So yeah, you've got, you know, a prime example is James Earl Jones. That is why he sold the rights to his voice in perpetuity. 20 years from now, James Earl Jones can still be voicing over Darth Vader and still be the voice of CNN. There is enough audio archived of James Earl Jones speaking that they can give James Earl Jones any script posthumously and he can read it in AI and his family will get paid. So it's pretty remarkable to see that. Pretty remarkable to see that AI has changed the game in Hollywood in that kind of way. I mean, a big part of the recent strike that happened. And thank you very much to the nanny herself, Fran Drescher. She is the head of the union that fought for it. But they were trying to make it to where you get scanned as an extra. So basically you're now a digital extra for the studio, and they can use you in this scene and that scene and over here and over there and over there and all kinds of stuff. Change your clothes, and you never have to be on set. Well, the question is, how do you get all of your SAG credit? At that point, are you eligible for all of your SAG benefits? You know, because you haven't been on site in studio. So they fought that and they won. You know, to say like, no, you cannot just scan and use people in perpetuity in that kind of way. No. So it's interesting. These things are being addressed. They are out there.
Yeah, I find that is quite remarkable. If we could probably, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you about, you know, ETs and aliens and stuff like this. I love one of the projects that I was involved in was working on an alien compendium of alien races, which was a lot of fun for me. What are some of your favorite, your top three? You know, you can think about it for a little bit about these. What are some of your favorite aliens out there? Like, because there's so many, the Greys, the Mantises. Yeah. This guy called Aesop that had the Sandown Clown. Yep. You know, the Mothman, the Dogman and stuff like this. You know, what is your of the ones that we could so far classify as aliens and stuff like this? What are some of your favorites? It doesn't have to be three, but we'll start at the first top three.
I would definitely have to say the Greys are up there. Just the stories behind them, and even some of the things that I've heard from researchers, stuff like that. Lynn Buchanan especially contributed to that a lot. The idea that the Greys basically cannot create new technology because of their hive mind. So they're basically using us to reverse engineer their technology and find new applications for them. So that one fascinates me and has always fascinated me. Even the idea that so many people have had experiences with them. I guess next to that would probably be the mantids. Those fascinate me a lot. The stories of that, and a lot of that comes from people like Tom Reed of the Berkshire UFO incident. That was one of the first real mantid reportings in that kind of way. So they've always fascinated me. And then I guess aside from that would be the Nordics, the ones that are supposedly just like us, you know. And the question comes to bear: are they from away? Are they from here? Are they from an adjunct dimension? Like any of them? It's pretty fascinating. Even looking at the work in the last few years of Michael P. Masters, who is an anthropologist hypothesizing the fact that if you extrapolate out humanity by another 10,000 years or so, we start to look pretty gray as far as the volume of our head, the size of our eyes, things like that. So is it possibly that the grays are us coming back trying to figure out what we did, which explains a lot of the questions, a lot of the messages that they have for humanity, like stop fighting amongst each other, leave nuclear weapons alone. Good God, leave nuclear stuff alone. The questions and the wanting to know more about our DNA, that kind of stuff. Like just the idea, are they trying to recover something or undo something that maybe we did to us?
So I guess the short story, the man from the year 1 million, wasn't that far off then.
Yeah.
That was one of the primary people that deeper skeptics like to use as an archetype for the Greys, was the man from the year 1 million. And I'll have to take a look at that myself, but it is quite fascinating, and people's hypothesis of, if you were to take dinosaurs and put them on a similar path, would they represent the reptilians, as far as what we think of and all that stuff like this? And I just find it so interesting.
Yeah.
Especially for the project particularly. I've drawn so many different types of reptilians. It's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And even the idea of reptilian to begin with, that one is one that is strange because of the relationship with reptilian going back millennia amongst humanity. Everything from Garden of Eden to ancient Greece to even modern times. It's pretty fascinating to see the connection of serpentine with humanity the whole way through, and the stories of that. So, yeah,
definitely. So I guess we'll go ahead and end that here. Anything else? Any parting words you have for the listeners before we conclude?
We all get attached to a lot of things, Chris. We all get attached to a lot of topics. There's a phrase in science called killing your darlings, and that's the idea that even if it's your hypothesis, you're ready to throw it out once the evidence points the other way. And we all need to be willing to do that. Faith is a fantastic thing, and it's a beautiful thing, but we've got to keep open hearts. We've got to keep open minds. We have to remember that science begins with observation. Science begins with experience. Without that, science doesn't begin. And as soon as you have had the experience, science has begun. So are you going to take part in the science, or are you just going to leave it by the wayside at that point? So yeah, if you're an experiencer, keep your mind open, keep your heart open, keep looking for that connection, because it's out there. So thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, definitely. And this has been Conspire Theory. Be sure to check us out. Be sure to check out Curious Realm and Curious Research at Chris Jordan. And we'll talk to you all later.